So they came here, and the Jesuits started in St. Mary County. And they focused around St. Mary City, and then they started moving up the river. Now, we take a look at this church here. Why did the Jesuits come into here, or why did they settle here? Well, you'll be going down to St. Indigos later on. It's about 25 miles down that way, okay, by the river. And remember, back in 1600, that road was not there. That road was not there until the 1930s. So most people traveled by what? Boat, water. So if you look at this point, the neck, there is water on this side, water on this side, and that side. And into the 1930s, the majority of the people came to church by water. And if you take a look at this one, the Jesuits moved their way up the river, spreading missionary work among the Indians. So they were St. Indigos, and they had that. And the interesting part, when Calvin came, if you came with him on the boat, you brought people with them, he gave you land. That's the proprietary manor model that Calvin wanted. So the Jesuits were on board, and they had aliases. Okay? And they had aliases because Father was an agent of the Pope. That's how they referred to him at the time in the Church of England. So if you So, these were the Jesuits who came to Maryland. If you look at the names there, as you were a Jesuit, you were given an alias. Okay? If you turn the card over, those are the Jesuits' priests. They had aliases. Andrew White was known as Tom White. John Palmer was a Grabner. If you go to Georgetown, there's a building called the White Grabner Building. Those are the first two Jesuits came. So all the Jesuits had aliases because they were not being found. So they came. So if you look here into Maryland, understand Maryland, they started coming up the river. And guess what? They had a major point down St. Indigos. The other one was up St. Ignatius in Chapel Point in Charles County. This is like halfway. It's 25 miles to here, 50 miles up. And if you look at a map of Maryland, I had in here little dots to show you. So it was a one-day sail from each visit. So it was great to get up here so you can see that. But remember also that as you went along here, there were only how many Catholics that came across in that first boat? 20. They were very, very rich. They were the gentry because Calvin passed them a manor which they could then practice and go. So they came there. And then if you look here, you'll find, those are interested to it, we have Newtown now. But right across here, there's a point of land called Protestant Point. And why was that? That was, we think, is that they let them know that the Church of England was still around. They were here. So here's Newtown, so you can see that, and you'll see Protestant Point. Newtown's there, and you'll see it all on the side. Protestant Point. So they came here, and then in 1640, William Breton, which is Breton Bay's name up there, was given this piece of land. Okay? When you came in, you saw a cemetery. Okay? From there on down, it was given to William Breton. Okay? And then, that about 1640. At the time, the Catholics and Jesuits were practicing in homes. Okay? They would have their homes after they have masses. Well, you have to learn about English history at the time. Who was in power, what was going on. So they came on over, and the initial people who came were indentured servants. So they had used indentured servants as a means of labor and so forth into the early 1600s. In 1661, the rule of England changed, and Charles I was more liberal, so that they could build things. So at that point, William Breton gave an acre and a half to the local Catholics here to worship and bury their dead. And that's where we did it, that cemetery. So that cemetery dates to the 1600s, even some deaths before 1660. So that's going there. And that's where the original chapel was, up there at up at the cemetery. And that was there. So they had that. But this is still owned by Breton. And then in 1668, Breton sold this to the Jesuits for 40,000 pounds of tobacco. That was the currency at the time, which is about $1,700. What a deal. So they got this land, and then the Jesuits started working here. And they worshiped there at that church, and there's evidence that there was a home there too, so they were living there. That went on to about 1700s. And so what happened in the 1700s was the Church of England got going. And they took power. And they put in a called the Act of Popery, where Catholics could not openly worship or hold public office. Originally, at St. Mary's City, as you drive by, you will see a church down there, and you will see possibly the State House. And so when the Catholics came over, they wanted to have a distance between them. And I'll pass this around. The circle in red is where the State House was. And about a mile away, there is the church, the first church. A separation of what? Church and state. That's what the Catholics wanted. Wow. They didn't want the government telling them what to do. So that's how they built it. That was the grand plan. Okay? Well, the Protestants came on in, some Puritans from Virginia. As old St. Mary's County said, there's three types of people down here: St. Mary's Countyans, foreigners, and Virginians. They came on in, they took power. They took over the colony and moved the capital from St. Mary's City to where? Annapolis. Okay? And then there was a battle up there between Catholics and Protestants. Now, if you go to Annapolis, downtown Annapolis, you will see two circles. State circle, church circle. Neck and neck to each other. No separation of church and state. Okay? So I have a map here of St. Mary's on one side and the map of Annapolis on one side. You can see that difference because now the Church of England was in charge. Now, what?
You were talking about the original people that came over from England, the African American Matthias. Could you share that with me?
Oh, sure. One of the people they picked up that came over was Matthias de Souza. And he was the first documented African American to come as a free man to Maryland. And he was down at St. Mary's City, and then he worked in the colony and worked on through. That's all I know. Okay? I'm not going to put stories out or whatever it came. Okay? So that went on there. So then the Catholics went down, the church closed, and that was going on. About the same time throughout the colony, that's when the indentured servant model started to fail. Because of the indentured servant model, that they would bring these people over, they would work for 5 to 7 years, and then their indenture was over with. They had to go get somebody else to come. So it was quite a problem to go. And that's when they started importing and bringing African Americans over to work. Okay? So that was in the early 1700s. At the time, the major crop was tobacco. Okay? The soil here is not the best thing for growing things, so they had tobacco. So that was very labor intensive, and so they had to go and work with it at the time. There is documentation that here at the manor, as they call it, there were slaves here, and they worked here. Okay? They had that model through the 1700s and up until 1838. At that time, the the Jesuits I know of made a decision economically and from other moral issues to sell. There were 42 slaves that were sold from Newtown Neck out of a total of 247. All I have is their first names. I have no idea who their last names are. There were two groups I know working in Georgetown. One was with Dr. Rothman, and another group was for the genealogy. So I don't know the genealogy of what. We do know that not all the slaves were sold. There was a presence of slaves that were not here, and the Jesuits marrying to other slave owners around, so they didn't split the families. So some of those families are still here. We're working as an oral history trying to bring them back. We just did recently interview the lady who was 92 years old, Anna Berry, and she's African American, and she was here, and she's the oldest parishioner of our parish, but she was here at the time in the early 1900s. So after the Jesuits sold the slaves, they moved more into the tenant farmer mode, where they would parcel off pieces of this property. At one time, there was 11 to 12 tenant farmers living here. So as a tenant farmer, you would be working, you would grow your crops. And let's say you grew 3 bushels of corn. Well, you would keep 2 bushels, and you would give the other bushel to the Jesuits. Okay? And so that's how they worked, and that's how that model went from the middle 1800s up until the middle 1900s, and then they rented the whole thing to one farmer. So he takes care of that. So they went away to tenant farmers. But tenant farmers were here until the 1970s. But let's go back to this church. Okay? Most Catholic churches, correct me if I'm wrong, are done east to west. Okay? This is not east to west. So we wondered about that. What's so significant about this church? Was it built for the road? No, there was no road here. Was it built for the water? No. Okay. And if we go outside later on, I can prove it to you. This church, what the Jesuits did, was went out, put a stake in the ground on the feast day of St. Francis Xavier, which is December 3rd. Okay? And on December 3rd, they cashed the stake out. And December 3rd, the annual sun is 116 degrees in 2017. I went out and measured that out there, it's 119 degrees. So the church is aligned with the feast day of St. Francis Xavier. Okay? It's not east to west. And an interesting part is that I went up to the cemetery. The cemetery is not done east to west either. It's off a little bit. I can't figure that out for a while. So that's what we have for that. But that was the chapel down in St. Mary's City is the same way. It's arrives on the feast day of Mary that they did it that way. So they did this here. So let's talk about, since you're a group here interested going on, we have no idea where the slaves lived on the manor. We have no idea. We have no idea if there was a cemetery on the manor where it would be. There's no idea doing it. You have to realize now, the only part that the church still owns here, the diocese owns, is 9 acres. The cemetery is about 7 acres here. The rest is owned by the state of Maryland. The Jesuits sold to the state of Maryland in 2007. Now, they've done some digging around to try to figure out where some things were based upon historical documents. But no one knows where things were. Okay? And there's nothing that we have on our records to show where things were done. There are African Americans buried in our cemetery. It's not a separate cemetery. So in the 20th century, 19th century, they were buried in our current cemetery. And we do know that because we have descendants of our parishioners know that their parents are buried there. So that's what you know for that. Now it's interesting too that a copy of our deed is on the wall. Okay, back there you'll see that. That's the deed that we read and what he did. And there's some names on there. There's 4 names: Gardner, Cole, and Thompson and Evans. Okay. The Gardner thing was the name of Luke Gardner, and there's documentation that in 1640 that their mass was held in his house. Well, our parish have descendants, direct descendants of Luke Gardner still going to this church. Okay, so you can see the line going from 1640 1840 up till 2017 are the people still coming. So there's that. There's also a book that tells a lot about Robert Pole's World. Talks about early 17th century Maryland. And he was a parishioner. In fact, he witnessed that deed in the back there. So you can see that going on. So this church here was originally, like Father said, was a prayer hall. Why? Because the predominant religion was what? Church of England. They wouldn't bring attention to it. So if someone comes sailing by, oh, it's a prayer house. Quaker, meeting house. And the Quakers were predominant at the time. And here's a picture of Third Haven in Easton, which was a Quaker meeting house. And if you look at that, and you look at the center part of the West Building, it was very similar to it. Okay? So then, later on, in the 1760s, they built the vestibule, was added. Why? Because anti-Catholic sentiment waned. It was interesting. During the French and Indian War, we have a direct inventory of all Catholics in the state of Mary County. The reason why, in the French and Indian War, where was the frontier?
Alleghenies.
The Alleghenies, Frederick, Maryland, so forth. If you know, with George Washington, he went up to Duquesne to fight. So he went along with Braddock, out there and went. So the settlers were coming back from that area to Baltimore and Athens. So the Assembly at the time said we have to finance this, so they taxed everybody in the state of Maryland 2 shillings per person per acre of land you owned. But they added 2 shillings more if you were Catholic. So Catholics had to pay a penal tax to support the Church of England because the church, we were a royal colony. We were a British royal colony. So the Church of England was in charge. So I, as a Catholic, would have been taxed as a penal code to support the local royal government. And even though, and then part of that went to the Church of England. Okay? Then, again, I'm taxed again. So then we built that there. So that's the point. So at the same time, we'll talk about the manor houses they went, because it came along parallel to it. And you really want to get into it, you have to look at what's going on in England at the time. Not rest of Europe, England, because the royal family's fighting back and forth over what religion was going on. There was a manor house here, we don't know. The first manor house, we do not know where it was. But by 1700s, it was closed. We don't know. They built a new one in front of the manor house out here, right beside it. About 10 feet away from it, same size. That was in 1720. There's documentation that during the Revolutionary War, that served as a hospital. Then in 1789, the Jesuits turned around and built the next manor house, which you see there. It's standing today. That was built in 1789. Now, there's also reference that in the War of 1812, the British landed here, destroyed our cemetery, then marched to Leonardtown. Okay? So that was it. So then in 1816, they raised the manor house up and they added the sacristy on. Okay? Because now, after the Declaration of Independence, Catholics had what? More freedom. And our First Amendment, one reading I read, our First Amendment attributed to beginnings of the Calvinists, which is what? Freedom of religion. Okay? And the early Marylanders here were for what? Religious tolerance. They went on religious freedom, religious tolerance. You could practice your religion freely and go forward.
Wow.
So that was
Being
built
persecuted
there.
right
So
there.
there was some repair work done after the War of 1812. The other interesting too is that right across that river, about 6 miles, is Virginia. Now, if you know in St. Mary's County during the Civil War, only 4 men voted for Abraham Lincoln. This is very pro-Southern. Maryland was very pro-Southern. Okay. At the time, the population of Maryland was about 15,000. Half of St. Mary's County were African Americans. The other half were white. The majority of the people in this county left here and fought for the South. Okay. But the Union occupied St. Mary's County. In fact, here at Newtown Neck, they were mustering up to invade the northern neck of Virginia. So think about it. This site has been witness to what? The 3 wars that existed in the United States. The Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and then the Civil War. So that was going on there. So that's the manor house. At the time that the manor was here, this was a working plantation. Not like a southern plantation, but it was a working farm. The Jesuits, at one time there were as many as 8 Jesuits living in the manor house. And they would use this as a means to go out and spread the missionary work. So you go down to St. Indigo's, that was a manor house, and there were groups of seminarians, Jesuits living there. I call that Jesuit South, Jesuit Central, and Chapel Point, Jesuit North, because they would get here and then ride out and do the circuits from these different places. And Newtown Neck was known as a great breeding ground for horses. Thunder, a lot of names like that. Thunder sold for 2,000 pounds of tobacco. The priests would buy their horses back and forth. So they're doing it. There is documentation at that time that there were slaves living and working in the manor house. I don't know if they lived in there, if they were working in the manor house. The documentation shows that. And then, of course, they had working slaves on the farm here with their families. Okay? And they allowed them to practice their religion. Okay? They didn't do much on education to do it. And based on education, there was a school here in 1653. Brother Ralph Crouch had a school here that was open to local Catholics, Protestants, and Native Americans for a school. So we have a school here. In 1677, they had the School of Humanities here, the start of Georgetown. And if you go to Georgetown University, the white Grossover Hall, there are a series of shields above the doorway. St. Indigo's, Newtown Neck, St. Ignatius, which is Chapel Point, White Marsh, which is Bowie, and Bohemian Manor. So the beginnings were beginning because the Jesuits were into education. And then they were here, and they worked on the farm and so forth. They left here in 1868.
How you doing? What's going
They weren't into farming. They were into education and spreading.
What you call me? What you call me?
And at that time, the farm manager.
Rochelle, I'm a robber. You gonna learn. You gonna learn. You gonna learn.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for your attention. My name is
Thank God you don't see it, girl. They gone. I've been gone.
My background is in historical archaeology. I just want to say a few things
Everybody high.
for
Everybody high. You can see it. That was awesome.
Sure.